Hello again peeps, thank you for clicking on the video. Before I get started, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of the newcomers in recent months and a big thank you to all of the existing subscribers for sticking around. Obviously I've not posted a video in several months and I do apologise for that. The reason being is mainly because of the COVID-19 and the lockdown and what have you. It's made access to my permissions very difficult, and therefore producing any kind of half decent content has been quite difficult. Whilst I was furloughed, I tried to use the time constructively, and I've taken up Japanese whet stoning in order to sharpen knives. I think I've said it before in previous videos, but I'm a chef, so you know it kind of went hand in hand with my trade. And whilst I was sat at home, you know, not doing much, it was a good thing to do to pass the time and not to trump my own, you know, blow my own trumpet as it were, but I've got fairly good at it, so, and I've got an half decent kit under my belt now. So I'm sorry this isn't about air rifles. I do plan to make a video about air rifles in the future. My next video after this little set will be all to do with air rifles again, but for the meantime I just kind of want to share stuff that I've learned in recent months and you know, give a little demonstration on how to sharpen knives and give a bit of information on the kit you should be looking to get if it's something you'd be interested in getting into. So before I get set up, I just want to say this is the gun I'll be doing a review on. It was a purchase I made at the start of the year, I believe. To those who recognise it, it's obviously the BSA Ultra. I've always wanted one of these rifles. I think they're absolutely fantastic bits of kit. I knew they were even before I brought one. And since I've owned it, I've really enjoyed using it. So my next bit of content to do with air guns will be all to do with this. So you know, I'll be doing a review on it and a bit of a pest control video and what have you. But in the meantime, as I say, my next video coming up will be all to do with whet stoning. So in this video I'll give a bit of a run through of my kit and perhaps why you should be owning it and what to look at, you know, price wise and all the rest of it. And then, so the video doesn't get too long, I'll end it there, and then I'll record another video and post it up, and it'll be all about like a demonstration on how to actually sharpen your knife and stuff. So if that seems like your kind of thing, please stay tuned, and if it doesn't seem like your kind of thing, I do apologise, and please look out for this video in the near future. Thanks very much. Okay, so before I get started, I just kind of want to say, like, obviously I'm not trying to teach anybody to suck eggs. If you already know what you're doing when it comes to whet stoning and knife sharpening, then you know there's every chance that you're not really going to get much benefit from watching this video, other than perhaps a good laugh. So please, by all means, watch it. But as I say, I'm not trying to teach anyone to suck eggs. So I'll start on the left. This is what's known as a knife steel. Okay, this is what's known as a diamond steel. And people often refer to them as knife sharpeners, and they're not, basically. What they're for is maintaining an already sharp knife. So this here is pretty much the same thing. It's called a leather strop. You get a soft side and then you get a hard side. The hard side is for things like chisels, garden shears and what have you, and then the soft side is for things like knives, you know, kitchen knives, hunting knives, blah blah blah. They come in different sizes, so as you can see I've got a bigger and a smaller one. You know, you can make them yourself if you're that way inclined and you've got some spare wood kicking about and the right sort of leather. I think horsehide makes the best type of stropping material. And as I say, people will often confuse these things as a knife sharpener, and they're not. Basically you use these to maintain an already sharp knife. So you'd use something like this on a daily basis, and after you've used your knife you just give it a quick run over. So I've got a knife here to demonstrate. I'll just use my Mora companion, and what you'd do is you'd start off on one side and you run the knife up the steel, and you do equal runs on both sides, trying to go from heel to tip or tip to heel, whichever way you want to do it. There's people that do it differently. I tend to just prefer doing it like that, and you finish up on the opposite side to what you started, trying to maintain an equal motion on both sides. And the whole process of doing that, as I say, is to maintain an already sharp knife. So if you've got a sharp knife, once you finish using it, in order to keep it sharp, you'd run it over a steel or you'd run it over a strop. As I say, a diamond steel would maintain a knife to a sharper edge, but it would also wear down twice as quick. I think this is it's a Wurstoff steel, which is made by a German company. And they retail for about 35–40 quid depending on which one you get, and I've had this a couple of years and it still looks brand new. I've had this about the same sort of time and it's pretty much just an ornament at this point because all of the diamond stuff has come off of it, whereas this will carry on for years. As I say, they all purposely all serve the same purpose. With a strop you can kind of go a little stage further and you can apply a compound. So something like this is what's known as like an abrasive compound or a polishing compound, which depending which one you've got, and you'd apply it onto the strop, and you'd then have more of an abrasive action than what you would if the strop was just bare. I did try to apply this to this strop, but for some reason it didn't take. But the green one did take to this strop, so I wanted to have them both loaded up with like a kind of more abrasive one and more of a polishing one, but the polishing one didn't really take, so I ended up just removing both. A lot of people swear by strops and you can get really good results. Excuse me. I know some YouTubers that have like, you know, several strops all loaded up with different kind of like, you know, compounds ranging from a low grit up to a high, and they can keep their knives like razor sharp all year round. I much prefer to use a steel to maintain a sharp knife. I don't really get on well with stropping. Basically all you do with it is you start at one end and you softly run the edge of the blade against the leather, and what that does is it kind of like pushes all of the fibres of the knife's edge all into a straight line, causing the blade to be sharper. As I say, that only works and is only effective if you're doing it on a sharp knife. If you were doing it on a blunt knife, it wouldn't have any effect. Likewise, neither would a steel. And that's then where things like a whetstone come into play. So I'll just move this out of the way quickly. What you can see here is a little collection of whetstones that I've got. This one is the first one that I got, and it's a bit of a kind of generic cheapy one that I paid about 15 quid for, and it's what's known as a combination stone. So you've got a 600 grit and a 1000 grit, whereas this one here is just a 140, that's just a 800, that's just a 400, and that's just a 220. As I say, these are what's known as a combination stone, and as you can see, the 600s had a bit of a pasting. At one point it was really dished out, so I had to go and buy one of these, which is basically a flattening stone, and you use it whilst both wet. You soak both of them for a while, and then you just kind of rub it across the surface of the stone that's dished out, and eventually you'll end up with a flat stone again. I think that's, yeah, it's a Narnia one, or Narnia one, sorry, and it retailed for about 30 quid. This one here is a Sheffic one. You can get ones like Pebble Sharp on Amazon, and I forget a few of the other names, but they're kind of all basically the same thing. You'll pay the same price, and they're good for what they are. But one thing I will say is they're fairly soft, and they'll dish out really quickly, and you'll find yourself needing to buy another one, especially if you don't own something like this or that. And what this is basically a Japanese flattening stone, or a lapping stone, and what you use it for, like I said, is to flatten out dished out stones. And because of its low grit and its high abrasiveness, you can use it to introduce a new bevel on a blade, or you could use it to like make a really dull knife, like have like a working edge, so that you could then take onto a higher grit and refine, and you know, put a much smoother edge on it. When you're putting an edge or reintroducing a new edge to a knife with this, you'll even see little bits of burr coming off of the knife, and that's how abrasive this is. So you never use this for long, and in most cases you would never really want to use it, because it means that you've let your knife get so dull. But I have had incidents, and people come to me and say, can you sharpen this for me? And like, you know, I've tried to start on a 600 and it just wouldn't even touch it. And you know, I was glad I had this in me arsenal, as it were. So yeah, as I say, that's the Atoma 140, and they retail for about 65 quid. And As you can see here, it came all the way from Japan, as did me other two. It's a long game, a waiting game, and they're expensive to buy. But you know, if you buy something like this to start with, which is what I'd advise, and you find yourself enjoying it and you want to take it further, then you know, by all means go and buy something a bit more expensive. And when I say something a bit more expensive, this comes to mind, and I'll try and get this name right without butchering it. It's the Naniwa Chosera 800, and this is basically made of a ceramic base, as opposed to what this is a much softer one, and it won't dish out half as often. And as I say, this is a soaking stone. They're all wet stones, but this literally just needs a bit of water on the surface and you can get going, whereas this you'd want to submerge it in water for about 5-10 minutes until the bubbles stop. I find these are a lot more practical, you know, because of the size. You've got a lot more real estate to work with, which allows you to be, you know, better at what you're doing, I suppose. You can sharpen bigger knives for a start, and yeah, I wouldn't advise anybody get something like that to start with, because it's very expensive and it might not be for you. So something like this, like a combination stone that costs about 15-20 quid, and it gives you, like, you know, a low end grit and a high end grit, kind of allows you to cover all bases. Because a lot of people would say, like, to have this many whetstones is quite excessive, and they'd be right, especially when you consider the fact that I want to buy some more. Because right now my stones range from, or my grits, sorry, particularly my grits, they range from 140 up to 1,000, and they would all be considered obviously your low ends. So they're for things like reshaping a knife, sharpening a knife. Anything past, you know, 1,000, excuse me again, would be considered something like a polishing stone. And right now I don't really have a need for polishing the edges of my knives. You know, they're not for show, they're for working, you know, and using in the kitchen, so they don't need to look fancy, but it would be nice to kind of go to that extent. So right now I'm happy with what I've got, but I do intend to get a few more stones. I think particularly I'd like to get a 3,000 and something like a 10,000, just to kind of cover all bases, and then that way I've got like a 140 all the way up to a 10,000. And as I say, yes, it's excessive, but considering I'm a chef and I sharpen a lot of my colleagues' knives, and you know, not every knife is given to me in a perfect state and, you know, has a perfect profile. Sometimes I have to work out chips, I have to, you know, put a point back on an edge, or, you know, put a point back on a knife, as I did with this. Years ago I bought this knife and then I let it turn to absolute mush, as it were, and it got all rusty, and there was a chip in the blade, and then I'd also snapped the top off the tip. With it being carbon steel, it's a lot softer than normal steel, so it's so much easier to work with and to put a, you know, reprofile and all the rest of it. So I must admit I did it on that cheap whetstone, I'll be honest. But if you had something like a Japanese shun knife, as opposed to something like I don't know, you know, a European knife, like something like a Wurstoff. The Wurstoff would have a Rockwell rating of about 58 maybe, and then the Japanese shun would have a Rockwell rating of about 62. And what that means is the Japanese knife is a lot harder. Sure, it's more brittle, but it's also more harder, and that enables it to maintain an edge for longer. But with it being harder, you'd need to use a better quality whetstone, because otherwise the knife would cut the stone before the stone cut the knife. So if you had a really expensive knife, going and buying something like this to sharpen it wouldn't really cut it, if you pardon the pun, because as I said, the knife would cut the stone more than the stone would cut the knife, purely because of the knife's Rockwell rating and its hardness. Most European knives have a Rockwell rating of about 58, whereas the Japanese say, no, that's not good enough for us, we like our knives to be harder, because therefore it maintains an edge for longer. So as I say, what you'd need is something a bit more of higher quality. Like this, as I said, these are ceramic based, they don't dish out as much, and this would actually sharpen such a knife, whereas that wouldn't. So it's kind of why I've got such a collection, because that way I'm able to kind of deal with pretty much all knives that, you know, might come my way. So just looking at the rest of what I've got here. These here are what's known as angle guides, sorry, and they're made by Mino Sharp, and they retail for about 30 quid. And I personally would advise not to bother with them, because all they did to me was basically slow down the process in which I learned to freehand. I wish I kind of didn't bother with them, but I did, and as I said, they're now sat in my toolbox just doing nothing. But you can get them, and they kind of create an illusion of consistency, but as I say, I often find they get in the way. But what you'd do is you'd slip it over the spine of the knife, and then it would maintain the angle of the blade in relation to the whetstone throughout the process of being sharpened, and then you'd come away with some sort of muscle memory, and then the next time you'd do it again and again until eventually you felt confident to do it without this on, and hopefully you'd still be holding that same angle. As I say, they're great in theory, but for me they slowed me down a little bit. These here are also very similar to what this and this is. They came with the more expensive whetstones, and basically you use it to just flatten out the stone and obviously like improve the surface of the stone. As you can see here, there's a little bit of like metal like particles left on the outside of the stone, and you know, for whatever reason, if you didn't want to contaminate your other stone or what have you, you'd use that like to just kind of finish off the surface again and make it all like back to normal. I don't find that it's necessary to do all too often, which is why the pair of them are still in their little packaging. And as I said, these won't dish out as much anyway, and I've never needed to flatten these, whereas this I kind of need to flatten every 2 to 3 uses. And just quickly, this here is what's known as a whetstone station, I suppose. Obviously I've made it myself, but you can buy them already made, and I think they retail for about anything from like 60 to 200 quid. You can buy the bridges separate, but all I've done is I've been and bought myself a box from B&M, and then been at the shed, got myself some lengths of wood and cut them to size, screwed them down onto the box. I've cut a little groove this end so that obviously while the surface water on the whetstone is sliding off, it's not ended up in my lap, and you know, it goes back down into the bucket, which minimises like mess. And then I've also, 2 seconds, cut a little groove here, and what that's for is to just drop the knife into when you're finished. So obviously it just keeps it out of the way, keeps the edge away from people and yourself, and obviously it stops it from falling down and all the rest of it, and you're not trying to balance the knife on top of your whetstone, and or you know, just dropping it into the water for the sake of it, or indeed just getting up and walking around carrying a knife. So it was a little bit of an idea on my behalf that seems to have worked really well, and I'm quite chuffed with it. These little clamps are basically just to hold the tray where it is, or the whetstone where it is, you know, whatever you're working on, you can put a clamp one end. I'll just try and sort this out quickly. And then obviously, you know, while you're pushing backwards and forwards, these clamps are keeping the stone in the bridge, or sorry, the stone still on the bridge and stopping it from sliding around. And with this little setup and some water in it, you can basically, you know, get sharpening wherever you want really, anywhere in your house. You don't always have to have like a designated area. You could do it in your garden if you wanted, you could do it in the bedroom, you know, or down in the lounge, whatever, like, you know, providing you don't get too excited and start splashing. You know, there's no reason you couldn't do it anywhere with one of them. And quickly, just before I finish up, that would be one of the first tips I'd ever give straight out the gate, is basically when you come to whetstoning, you need to be comfortable. If you're not comfortable, you're not going to concentrate, and if you're not concentrating, you won't get so much, you know, high-end results, and then you'll be disheartened, you won't feel like doing it again, and you know, the whetstone will end up in a cupboard for the rest of its life and you won't have learnt a new skill. So before you do anything, make sure that you've got, like, you know, enough time on your hands to get going, and you know, don't start a knife if you know you've got to pop out 20 minutes later. You know, if you've got your mum coming round or what have you, like, you need to keep, you know, a bit of time open for it. And like I said before, I think you need to reside to the fact that the first knife that you work on is probably going to get ruined. You know, you're going to ruin it before you put a decent edge on it. So don't start on a knife that's really valuable to you. And yeah, like I say, be comfortable, because if you're not comfortable, I don't think you'll take it much further. So one of the first things I did once I realised I enjoyed doing it was, you know, come away from the kitchen draining board and, you know, and a bad back and all the rest of it, and I got myself one of these and then a little stool and a little table, and I put that down on the table, and by the time I sit on the stool it's all at the perfect height for me to get going and not, you know, hurt my back or anything, and that way I'm left like free to just concentrate on what I'm doing, and I just enjoy the process so much more that way. So as I say, I'll leave it there. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea of the sort of kit you should need to have and what sort of like prices you should be looking at paying for it all. And as I say, in the next video, being as I've got all this out of the way now, I can just obviously get straight down to doing a demonstration, and yeah, hopefully I'll have given people some confidence to have a go themselves, or at the very least, like, you know, yeah, enjoy it. Like, I think, because that's what it is. Like, you know, you've got to enjoy it, otherwise you're not going to take it much further. So in order to enjoy it, you need to know what you're doing. So hopefully that's what I've given people an insight into. So as I say, I'll leave it there, and yeah, look out for the next video.